Ina mana, ina reo, ro rangatirama, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm amazed to be here and very honoured. I want to thank Louise for her kind words. I've seen a few friendly faces already this morning, and of course Ken's little backstory is so true, and I'll refer to it in a moment. The last time I was in Christchurch Central was in February, and when the earthquake was on, and we were doing the confidential listening and assistance service hearings on the 6th floor of the Latimer Hotel. And at 1 o'clock, we just seen one of our attendees out of the hotel and went back up to have some lunch, and bang! And I haven't been back since. But I have been back to the parole board and the airport and out that way. So when I walked around this morning, I thought, my goodness me. So I felt a bit emotional, you know, first of all being back here, and then thinking closely again about the confidential listening service and listening to Ken. So I thought, I haven't written a speech because I thought I'd just talk to you. It's a bit easier because we want to gallop across quite a bit of ground. And I'll just hold it up for you for anyone who wants to get a copy now, which is an unredacted copy. You know about redacting, don't you? Anyone who's tried to get their welfare files, you'll find most of it's blacked out. That is another mystery to me, why that happens. I mean, I know officially why it happens, but I doubt it. I don't really like it. So it's called Some Memories Never Fade, and if you can get it by going on the DIA website, Department of Internal Affairs, and it's sitting up there with the government response, which is beside it. And that has been something quite significant that I will refer to, because the journey of this amazing process has in many ways evolved and has still got further to go, and it might end up having set the seeds from what Ken wanted to what we did to rolling on politically, and how around the world everyone is now trying to address the wrongs that were done to children in the care of the state. So I'll just give you my little story, and that'll give you a context. So I've been a district court judge since 1985, and I can't believe they're still dragging me back in there to sit as on an acting warrant in court cases, because it's like 31, 32 years, but they're very short of judges at the moment, so I'm still sitting. But for a period of 7 years, I agreed to do the confidential listening and assistance service. And it happened in a way that I got a call and I was asked to put my name forward, and I had no idea what they were talking about, because even though you're a judge and you're closely associated with people, you are distanced from them because you're judging. So you sit in the youth court and you see young offenders and their families and whānau. You sit in the district court and you see offenders and they get sentenced, and you get reports about them, and you know on the paperwork the stuff. You sit on the parole board or the district's prisons board, which I've done for well over a decade, and you see the individuals and you see their support people making plans to be released into the community and keep safe. But and it's not until you meet 1,100 people who've been children in care, who are now adults, who can sit down with you for 2 hours and tell you about their lives, that you really get an understanding of the enormity of the issues for those people. And then the next thing, as you go on through the years, it suddenly dawned on me, these children are detained. You know, there's a law, there's the Human Rights, New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, and you can't be unreasonably detained, and so people make an enormous fuss if they get detained by a police officer and asked to blow in a breathalyzer test because they might be over the limit, you know, and the human rights are known at that level, because when you're an adult and you're free, you know about your rights. But when you're a child in care, it suddenly dawned on me, well, they're actually detained and they can't leave. And they can't leave until somebody lets them leave, or unless they run away, and then they're just brought back and their whole situation escalates. And sometimes their parents can't get access to them. And there it is. And if you're 6 or 7, you are powerless and you're left to the winds of fortune. And some people get an absolutely wonderful experience, and I have met one person out of 1,100, because of course the group we saw were people that came forward who had concerns about neglect, and so we were not seeing anyone other than those with concerns. So that of course needs to be borne in mind when we're talking. But I do know that some people are lucky and they are adopted by fabulous families, or are placed in a good placement, and they manage to stay there. They're not shoveled around from pillar to post, and the outcome can be good. But for a lot of people, we're talking thousands of young people, they are detained and they are powerless and they are moved around and not always looked after. One of the biggest failures in the state, from the state, in my point of view, is not watching over the children they took. They don't watch over them and see where they're sleeping, where they're living, are their circumstances changed, who's got access to them. It's not that they mean deliberately not to look over them, they're just flat out doing the next thing down the line. I can't really know exactly what the systems and processes are that interfere, that make it difficult for social workers to carry out a good job. That's why I now support an inquiry, because I didn't at the beginning, because I thought, well, what will happen with this process, which I'll go back to in a minute, is that it'll go up to government, will report, and something will happen. You know, they will acknowledge the people that have come forward, look at the things that we've put in our report, and something will occur. But as I will explain in a minute, that's not actually the way it ended up. So now we've got a department who wrote a response, and I don't want to be disrespectful to the department, but I think that if you read that response, it clearly says that only a small number of children were affected, not enough to warrant an apology, and that most kids were okay. So that is their official position, and that is what they believe. But I don't know that that can be sustained, because when we saw 1,100 people, we got the strong impression they all had siblings. The many people had committed suicide and died over the years, and I think there are a bundle of thousands of young people, and I'm quite prepared to say that that is what I believe. And so I think it cuts a lot deeper. And also for Māori, we did notice, this is just anecdotal of course, that over time, now we saw, say 1,100 people before we were closed down, and the biggest regret that we had was that we didn't finish our work in prison, because a lot of young people who were in care ended up with poor life outcomes, didn't have the tools to cope, started running away, situation escalated, and then they thereby end up in kohitere or in police cells and so on, and they end up with a life in prison. And I've met many of these men on the parole, but you can tell the difference because they've got like 13 or 14 or 15 pages of convictions going back till they're 15, and you can see clawing your way out of that is really difficult. So there are a distinct group in the New Zealand prisons that we did do a lot of prison hearings. Because I was on the parole board at the time, Dr. Disley chaired them for me, but we were nowhere near finished. And yet the outcomes we got for the prisoners were phenomenal, because once they had a chance to clear their mind or get off their chest the things that had happened to them when they were little, they were able to move on to deal with drug, alcohol, and the things that sit on top of it, because underneath the rage and hurt and damage sits there, and it's really hard to rehabilitate and build your life when that is the core heart of your being. And the loss of your identity, or not knowing who you are, where you fit in the world, where you stand on the land, and who, you know, is so complex. And those are the sorts of things we learnt in the listening service. But I've written down, because the time is limited, I've written down a few things I wanted to discuss. First of all, to give you a very quick rundown about how we did it. And I remember meeting Ken, because I was scared to meet him, because I knew that we had this ridiculous, ineffective terms of reference. And I knew I'd agreed to do it for some inexplicable reason, but how it was sold to me was, this is going to be a truth and reconciliation forum, something new like South Africa. And, I thought, well, this has got the seeds of something wonderful in it there. They were saying the High Court is not working, it's still not working at the moment, because when you file litigation in the High Court, it's really incredibly difficult to get any case to succeed. And the Crown law has fought every case to the death because they do not want, I believe, a success in the High Court. That is a Crown litigation strategy, to keep the damages down and try and get this problem fixed. But there are genuine reasons why taking litigation is hard. Because you have to prove your case to a standard that the High Court can make findings that are truly valid. It's hard to get the evidence all these years later, and you can scrounge through your file, but it probably doesn't have the pieces of paper you want because a lot of the things are not recorded. And so it is a struggle, and I really have to commend Sonia Cooper for the effort that she has made tirelessly to try and find an avenue of justice for those people that have issued litigation. I believe over 500 cases, but I don't really think too many of them have made progress, except through the settlement process. So the situation is the High Court was difficult, so the government wanted to find a way to somehow action this, because it couldn't just sit there for decades, although decades are passing, I do believe, since all of this began. So they set up the confidential listening service, and they asked me if I would do it. And I sort of wanted to do it because I thought it was a challenge and would be wonderful. But then I saw the terms of reference, which literally said we couldn't do anything, and no lawyers could come. And it was just called the listening service. And I had no notion what that might mean. I thought, well, what would people think? We're not a radio station. It sounded like a radio station. So I said, well, I think you better put confidential, because before that they'd had the confidential forum that Sir Anand Satanyan had chaired for people who'd been in the psychiatric service because of dropping out of Lake Alice and all of that. So this is kind of an extension of the work that he did. But they really didn't want it to have an outcome. So I think that's become clear to me. How naive was I? But they really just wanted us to listen. One of the things they said, help people find closure. We thought, well, yeah, sure, we can do that. I don't think. I mean, how can you find closure through listening to them? No one will ever find closure completely. All you can do is do what you can to assist people. So the way we went about it, we had the terms of reference, and we gathered people together, though we had to go through a process to get the people to apply and select our panellists. And we also had our very valuable facilitators, and I'd like to pay tribute to them. We had 3 facilitators, and those were the people who dealt, when people rang in to register to come and see us, they talked to them on the phone for months before they came, they talked to them after, they got them jobs, they sorted out their benefits, they got them counselling, and they received calls. Some people rang us every day for 7 years. And I said to our people, let's worry about that, because we've got no money, but we have got the time of day, and I don't want anybody to get any pushback from the phone. So we made a vow that we would receive calls and we would listen on those calls, and we wouldn't hang up on anybody or get angry. We would, because that's what we had to offer, the time of day. And that turned out to be valuable for some people who were very isolated, nobody to help them, and they'd ring us, hello Wellington, and we would say, they didn't ring me. Our facilitators were skilled people who were able to talk to them and forge friendships. And that was a small thing, but I think it was a valuable thing. So our terms of reference, we had the facilitators and we had us. Now, for me, I'm a bit of a practical person, a little bit entrepreneurial, which sort of often clashes with my judgy side. But anyway, it worked well for this. And we were able to, I made our team, we had to sit down for a couple of weeks and thrash out what is it we are actually doing, because we needed to, and you'd be surprised, we sat down in a room, all of us, for hours and hours and days working out what we were doing. Because I felt if you're going to do something like this, you can cause so much harm if you don't do it right. One word wrong in a letter and your history. People are hurt and damaged. They do not want to be dealt with in a patronising way. They do not want to be given the brush off. They do not want to be told that was the social work practice of the day. And we could see letters going out from the department to people saying, well, you know, that was a social work practice of the day. They still say that officially. I take great exception to it. It is just a way of saying, well, you can't excuse social work practice of the day, because people don't come forward to talk about social work practice of the day. They come forward to talk about what has happened to them in their lives, and they half of them didn't even know they had a social worker. So, you know, that's such a red herring. It's rather, you realise I'm talking passionately about the people. I'm not trying to get at the department or the government, but when you get letters, long bureaucratic letters, you should have seen some of the letters turning down people illegal aid. I mean, I read, the page is long, you can't understand a word of it, the bureaucratic language and the words that are used. It would be enough to trauma. I had an old gentleman in a wheelchair, and he got one of these letters. I was enraged because of the humanity. Who would write such a letter to this man? And but they did, because not much thinking goes on about who you're writing to. They're just thinking, I'm trying to brush off this guy's legal aid. So we got started on the hearing, and we realised a little way through, well, we weren't going to sit through a lot of years listening to people not being able to report on their stories and the common themes. So we went back to the department and the government and asked for permission to report on common themes. And so that at least our big hope was that those themes and those legacies of effect would be taken into account, because when people came to see us, they came to talk about future of other children. They didn't come to talk about themselves only. They came forward to talk about children so the future could hold something better for them, and that was why they came. And, you know, they didn't come to sue the state. Nobody came to sue the state. They came to talk about their life in care. And we would try and ask them to tell us if they were willing about what had happened. And we go right back to the beginning, like, you know, where mum and dad, where we were born and so on, and over time. They didn't come to say, I'm come to tell you I got sexually abused. It's not like that at all. It's just over time they felt able to tell me, you know, when they got hurt, and if we were careful, they might tell us a little more, and we would find. So we found that 57% of the women that came forward had been sexually abused, which we thought was a huge figure of our group. We had anticipated, because women do get raped and people take liberties a lot, and some of the things that I heard of the women in state care were just horrific. However, what was the amazing stat to me was the men who came forward. 57% of the men, exactly the same number, told us about their being sexually abused. And we're not talking trivial matters. We're talking rape, anal rape, you know, the full. And we were the poor people on our panel. We're not hardy judges like myself, and not used to maybe hearing some really difficult things in life. We're struggling to accept the level of violence, and we're struggling to accept the careless, reckless management of their cases that had fallen off the, you know, down some track and forgotten. And so many bureaucratic things, you know, a simple little thing like you're being in a family and you're doing really well with that family, and you've been with them for 8 years and you're loving your life, and here you are, you've come from, and then that family needs to go to Australia and you're not allowed to go with them. So we met quite a few people who had to be replaced into new families after 8 years. You think of your children and grandchildren, it's just sort of the trauma associated with these kind of decisions. So we heard that quite a number of times. That may be not a current thing now, but often when people are in foster care, their original family keep a tie on it, and so, you know, things are very, very complex regarding what happens to them with regard to whether they can leave the country or get adopted or whatever. So we heard and met these people and did, I think one of the greatest things about the confidential listening service, it could provide the pastoral care, because as Ken has pointed out to me, and boy was he furious when I first met him, he thought this confidential listening service was a load of rubbish, I think, and it was going to achieve nothing. He wanted a full hearing, and I can totally agree with him that the confidential listening service was not going to answer everything. It's only one part of the story. And I do think at the end of it, though, we did achieve the bits that we could do, and that was the pastoral care. And that was, we could get the files, we could get counselling, we could talk and talk and talk on the phone, we could meet with the people, we could find their families, we could get them jobs, we could sort out their parole, we could sort out their medication, we could find them housing, and numerous things. And the efforts our people made when they did a good job, and I suppose some people would feel they didn't get enough, but they did try hard. We got people writing books, getting books published. We tried to be creative and think of all sorts of things that might just add value. One woman had written an amazing poem, which we published in our report, and we rang John Key's office and got his PA to promise to get the Prime Minister to read this letter, because this letter and this poem did convey, and we heard back that he had read it. So just telling that woman that we got the Prime Minister to read her poem added value to her experience. Maybe it's a little thing, I don't know whether it touched his heart or whether he even remembers it, but those are the kinds of things we did just to try and improve things for the people who felt they've never been heard and never believed when they were heard. Now, there are three headings which I'll go through here. One is, these are some of the things that I felt disquieted about difficulties. I still feel that, so I think there's still a lot of work to be done. We haven't dealt with all the people in prison, and I'd said in our report, I do believe they should set up a confidential listening service to continue on in the prisons, because the results for those people who are incarcerated can be great, having that process. But top of my list is accountability. So having said to you earlier that these children are detained, what accountability is for the department when the department has gone wrong or done wrong? Well, you can't really see anything. The thing that concerned me the most when I started out was, oh, well, where's the duty of care? I rang around the judges. Where's the duty of care written down about how people are supposed to be cared for by the state? Because I wanted to read it. And I found to my astonishment there was no duty of care written down anywhere. And not to this day is there a duty of care. So we asked the department, well, what's the duty of care? And they said, well, do no wrong, or do no harm, do no harm. Well, that, as a judge, I was assuming there was, we will do, look. So that still remains yet not done. The system, I can't see how the system is held to account. Somebody may know better than I do, but at the moment I can't see it. I can't see. You can't go to the court. There may be some internal things when things go wrong, but it's very. If it's there, I can't see it. Now, if there is a staff member or someone as a perpetrator, they can be taken through the criminal justice system. We did take people to the police. 86 people, in fact, I think. The police were willing to investigate, and there were some trials pursued, but and successfully. But sometimes the perpetrators were now deceased, and it's an enormous thing to bring a criminal trial. But they have brought some. But there were cases that we came across in our 1,100 where children had been abused, and they were noted and known about on their files, But, perpetrators just walk away. If you're moved on, if you're working in this part of the department, as Ken said, you can now become a coach or something, you can be moved on. And in a way, the department is sheltering, or could be said to be sheltering, offenders who are free to offend on another day. And that you'd have to worry about that, and that hasn't been addressed. I'd also think with accountability, for this group, they're trapped in this, detained, they're no longer detained, but there's no tribunal or any independent body they can go to take their grievances, even going on in the future. So you've just got the department itself, who is the alleged perpetrator, managing how its victims or complainants are dealt with. What they will receive by way of compensation, I don't believe there's any appeal process if there's been any error, not just about quantum of money, but actual error. And then, of course, when the confidential listening service was there, it provided a buffer, and the historic claims unit were terrific. They did deal with us, and we dealt with them, and when people came to see us, they were willing, we made a recording of their hearing, which they could take away. And some people wanted to smash it up with an axe or bury it in the ground. Other people wanted to listen to it or put it away for their children. But it turned out further down the track that where people were willing, we could give their copy of the CD to the department, and they could listen to that 2-hour hearing and hear for themselves what was said, and that sometimes was enough evidence for them to accept the damage that had been done or the complexity of that person's life. There's a lot of people in the system, as you know, have many placements, like, 40 placements or 12 schools, and their name has changed, and they don't have any photos of their life, and identity is a key issue. With regard to Māori, this is just our anecdotal perception, but we did note that a lot of small Māori boys were put into homes, into like Hamilton Boys' Home, or straight to a home, not to a whānau or family. They went sort of straight to the home, and then of course they didn't really get out. And they'd say to me, well, why didn't they give me back to Nana? Why did they send me to the South Island and put me in a youth home down there? And now I'm in a gang, and I'm still in the gang. Why didn't they send me to Nana? Look at me, just look at me. And you can see just the physical look of the person. They really wished they'd been given back to Nana. So we've said there's no tribunal or place for grievances. Very difficult to get access to justice. And what is happening for the safety of children in the future? And that's the other major concern for me, and one of the things that we did put in our report after. We weren't allowed to make recommendations, you see. We weren't allowed to make findings or receive evidence, so we couldn't make any findings. But at the end of the day, after all that work, we felt, well, we will put together what everybody told us. And because when you've been in the care system, you've got loads of advice and loads of opinions and good things to tell the government that they could improve on, because you've actually been in the system. So we collated that, and we put forward some ideas, and we particularly wanted a separate care system away from the general MSD, and I don't think we've got it yet. It might be still on the table in this new department, but an independent care system that is visible, evaluated, and was separate from running around from the crises. At the moment, I believe they do the crises and the care all bundle into one big component, so it lacks focus. So I think an independent care system, once you're actually in care, is what is needed in New Zealand, so you can see it and you can see how it's working, and that would be vital. So we did make some recommendations. But what happened at the end, and I'm going on now, but what happened at the end of the system was not what I had envisaged. I had envisaged that set up like the South African Truth and Reconciliation Forum, except that the perpetrator wasn't at the table. That was a difference, because in South Africa the perpetrator was there. But I had thought we'd put our report in, we'd get a response from government. By that I thought I meant the Cabinet and the Prime Minister of the day. But what happened was they gave it to the Department of Social Welfare to write the response to our report. So it went like this. When I read it, I was away at Oxford University. I've been asked it, and I spoke about this as well. Not that I'm a sort of academic boffin or anything, but I got this opportunity, and so I thought I would talk about the confidential listening service. And I received this one day before it was put in up on the website, so I had 24 hours notice to read it. It had gone through Cabinet in September, but I got it at the end of October, one day before they put it on the public arena, so that cheered me up, as you can imagine. And I read it, and it was basically okay, because it was reporting back everything we'd said to them, so they'd sort of given us back everything that we'd said. But there was a couple of clauses in it, and that was that one clause that I mentioned, that the department felt this was a small problem, only small numbers, and didn't warrant, numbers not big enough to merit or warrant an apology. And the other thing which I was deeply hurt by, it said that some of the children were abused only some of the time, or words to that effect. So some of the children reported that they were only abused on occasions, not the whole time. And for that to be in a Cabinet report, I found shocking to think that we would, and that's tabled on the official Cabinet paper. And what that showed to me, and why I now support an inquiry, is it shows to me the lack of understanding about what the issues are, to be able to say those actually in an official report. Well, the Cabinet, no, it wasn't Cabinet, the whole Cabinet, the subcommittee of Cabinet accepted that and signed it off, and that was the end. And that's where it sits at the moment. So since that time, I've, written to the Prime Minister, and not the new Prime Minister, but the earlier Prime Minister, and also Anne Tolley, asking if we could just put the record straight, because there was quite a few mistakes in the departments. They said that I hadn't given our findings to them to check and credit, but we didn't make any findings because our terms of reference said not to make findings. So I'm confused as to whether they actually read the paper. I don't actually know if anyone has read Some Memories Never Fade. I know it's not a report that is in its usual format, because we wrote it differently so people could actually read it and get the feelings from it. But who has read it? Maybe no one. Maybe they've just read a few pages. But when you read the report, if you can go yourself and read it, so it's just right there for reading on the website, and you read one or two things in it, there's a clue to me that I just wonder whether they fully understand that we didn't make findings because we were not legally allowed to. We did, however, make some recommendations, which they said we were not tasked to do. And so that was a problem for them, I suppose, because by making recommendations they had to respond. And to give Minister Tolley her due, she did look at our report, and she did see me, and she was very happy with it, and she gave it to Paula Rebstock, and I met with Paula Rebstock, and the idea was to take from this what they could to put into the new Act. However, I met people from the new department now who are working hard to build something, I know not what, but I do hope it has got a separate care system and so on. It will happen over time. But the last person I met didn't know about the confidential listening service and hadn't read the report. And as far as I know, the common themes and legacies of effect have not been entered into any aspect of government. So all this does is illustrate how systems are really hard to change from knowledge into something that's going to become operational over here, because people don't want to talk about the past. They only, oh look, we know all that. Now, they'll say, we know that. We know that, but what do they know? That's what I say. What do you know about the systems that cause these breakdowns? Is it lack of money? I do know in all the studies I've done through the Henwood Trust that large tracts of money have been made available, but they've never been spent. They've gone over here and then not actually been spent. So, there's lots of disconnect, and I think there's a lot of work that could be done to improve the situation overall. So at the end of this, I'll finish now because I'm going over my time, whatever it was. But I do want to say that we've been moved since we did this work to do other things. So I've got a charity called the Henwood Trust, Charitable Trust, and we do a lot of work. And Sir Mark Solomon, who is associated with you, helped sponsor me in, and Sir Jerry Mataparai, and we wrote the Covenant for Our Nation's Children. And we want to put it up by the Treaty of Waitangi. And it's been signed off last year at Hopu Hopu by all of the, through the iwi chairs, 68 tribes. And if you go on the Henwood Trust website, you'll find a Covenant for Our Nation's Children. And my idea of doing this was that we could not rely on governments to be good parents and, look after our children, because in a way they're a government department and not equipped or have the capacity to do it. But all of us as a nation needs to make a commitment to look after all of our children, no matter where they are found. And so this is a one-page covenant that partly addresses some of the United Nations things, but in the end it's more than resources and money, but it's about who we are as a nation and how we stand together upon the land and look after our children and aspire an aspirational document for them. So I'm hoping that will be yet a tool that can be another thing that's on the table when we can get it out to New Zealand, and hope that they will subscribe to it. So far so good, but it's a mighty big task. I thank you, and I thank you for your courage. Those of you who have fought like Ken, year in and year out, but slowly and surely people are hearing. There's been a lot of press. We have to acknowledge the Human Rights Commissioner also has been battling to get the message out to New Zealanders so that they can listen and understand that something major has happened here. And hopefully the people who came to see us will eventually be thanked by the government for coming forward and having the courage to tell us these stories. Thank you very much.